For nearly 80 long years, the United States government has worked to erase every trace of a weapon so devastating that its very existence was classified above top secret. No photographs were supposed to survive. No blueprints were meant to leave the facility. Even the scientists who built it were forbidden from speaking its name after the project ended. But in 2003, when a military historian gained access to a mislabeled box in the National Archives, what he found made him go completely silent for several minutes. The documents inside revealed a weapon that should never have been possible in the early 1900s. A weapon designed to kill not hundreds, not thousands, but entire cities worth of people in a single deployment. And the reason it was buried has nothing to do with failure. It worked. It worked too well. But before we get there, we need to go back to where this story really begins. In 1901, the United States military had a problem. America had just won the Spanish-American War and found itself controlling territories across the Pacific and Caribbean. But projecting power across oceans required more than battleships and rifles. It required something the world had never seen before. A weapon that could end a conflict before it began. A deterrent so absolute that enemies would surrender at the mere threat of its use. The War Department convened a secret committee in Washington that fall. No minutes were recorded. No official authorization exists in any congressional record. But what we do know is that the committee issued a single directive to a small team of engineers and chemists working out of a converted warehouse in Baltimore. Build us a way to end wars without landing a single soldier. The team was led by a man named Dr. Emmett Harlow, a chemical engineer who had studied in Germany and returned to America with knowledge of compounds that most American scientists had never heard of. Harlow was not interested in incremental improvements to gunpowder or explosives. He was obsessed with what he called dispersal weapons, systems that could spread lethal agents over massive areas using nothing but wind and atmospheric pressure. He believed the future of warfare was not about bigger bullets. It was about making the air itself unbreathable. His notebooks, declassified only partially in 1997, describe experiments with aerosolized chemicals that could induce respiratory failure, skin necrosis, and neurological collapse within minutes of exposure. He called it saturation warfare. The military called it Project Blackdamp. But turning this concept into reality would require something they did not have yet: a delivery system. Harlow needed a way to disperse his chemical agent over an area of at least 10 square kilometers with enough concentration to ensure total lethality. Artillery shells would not work. They exploded on impact, burning off most of the chemical payload. Balloons were too slow and too vulnerable to wind patterns. What he needed was a device that could be deployed from altitude, descend slowly while releasing its contents, and blanket an entire region before anyone realized what was happening. And that is when he designed something the military had never requested and never expected: a glider bomb filled with pressurized canisters of what he called Compound 17. When the canisters ruptured at a predetermined altitude, the compound would vaporize and spread across the target zone in a cloud that was heavier than air. It would sink into trenches, it would seep into buildings, it would settle into lungs, and it would kill everything that breathed. When Harlow presented his prototype to the War Department in 1903, they did not laugh. They immediately classified the project and moved the entire operation to a remote testing facility in the Arizona desert. What happened next would push chemical warfare into territory that would not exist again until World War I. The facility was designated Site 7. No town appeared on maps within 50 miles of it. Workers were transported in covered wagons and sworn to secrecy under threat of treason charges. The first test of the glider bomb took place in June of 1904. The target was a mock village constructed to simulate a coastal town. Wooden buildings, cloth tarps, and over 200 livestock animals placed throughout the structures to simulate human populations. The glider was released from a hydrogen balloon at an altitude of 3,000 feet. It descended silently. At 1,000 feet, the canisters ruptured. Observers reported that the cloud spread faster than anyone had predicted. Within 4 minutes, the entire village was enveloped. Within 9 minutes, every animal in the target zone was dead. But being invisible to the eye was only half the plan. What they intended to do with it was far darker. Harlow had not designed this weapon for battlefield use. Armies could retreat. Soldiers could wear masks or protective gear if they knew an attack was coming. No, Compound 17 was designed for urban populations, for harbors, for capitals. for cities that believed they were safe behind naval blockades and standing armies. Declassified memos from 1905 outlined target assessments for hypothetical conflicts with Germany, Japan, and even Great Britain. The documents list specific cities: Hamburg, Tokyo, Liverpool, London. San Francisco was even listed as a defensive scenario if the West Coast came under attack. Each entry includes population density, prevailing wind patterns, estimated casualty rates, and optimal deployment times based on weather patterns and urban activity cycles. The level of detail is chilling. One assessment for Hamburg notes that the prevailing westerly winds would carry the cloud inland from the harbor, maximizing civilian exposure in residential districts. The memo estimates that a single glider bomb deployed at dawn when most people were still indoors could achieve a 92% fatality rate within the primary dispersal zone. That zone was calculated at 8.6 square kilometers. At the time, over 70,000 people lived in that area. One memo, stamped with a handwritten note that simply says approved in red ink, describes a scenario in which 6 glider bombs are deployed over Tokyo Bay during a trade dispute. The estimated death toll within 24 hours is listed as between 180,000 and 230,000 civilians. The memo does not use the word civilians. It uses the term soft targets. The language was cold, clinical, detached from the horror it described. But Compound 17 had a problem. It was too unstable. Harlow's early formula degraded rapidly in heat. It reacted unpredictably with moisture in the air. Worse, it was beginning to kill the people who manufactured it. Between 1904 and 1906, 11 workers at Site 7 died from exposure. Their deaths were not recorded in any official military documentation. Their families were told they perished in industrial accidents, but the facility doctor kept his own notes. He described symptoms that began with violent coughing and progressed to internal hemorrhaging so severe that victims drowned in their own blood. He wrote that the compound seemed to target the respiratory system with a specificity that suggested it had been designed to do exactly that. And he was right. Harlow had engineered Compound 17 to bind to lung tissue in a way that made it nearly impossible to treat. Even survivors suffered permanent damage. One worker who lived through a low-level exposure lost the ability to breathe without mechanical assistance. He died 3 months later in a military hospital that has since been demolished. In 1907, the project reached a critical turning point. Harlow stabilized the formula. The new version of Compound 17 could be stored for weeks without degradation. It vaporized at lower temperatures, which meant it could be deployed in colder climates. And it was more lethal. Tests on animal subjects showed that the new formula required only 1/3 the concentration to achieve total fatality rates. The War Department authorized the construction of a production facility. Documents suggest they intended to manufacture enough Compound 17 to fill 300 glider bombs by the end of 1908. But then something happened that changed everything. In October of 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt received a classified briefing about Project Blackdamp. No transcript of that meeting exists, but 3 weeks later, Roosevelt issued an executive order that has never been fully declassified. The order shut down Site 7. It disbanded the research team, and it mandated the destruction of all chemical stockpiles and documentation related to the project. Harlow was reassigned to a teaching position at a university in Pennsylvania. He died in 1911 under circumstances that were ruled accidental, but remained suspicious. He fell from the roof of his home. No witnesses, no note, no explanation. For decades, Project Blackdamp existed only as rumors among military historians, a ghost story whispered in defense circles. Some believed it was real but exaggerated. Others thought it was disinformation designed to make America seem more powerful than it was. A few dismissed it entirely as wartime propaganda that had somehow survived into peacetime. But in 2003, that mislabeled box in the National Archives changed everything. Inside were nearly 400 pages of documentation that had somehow escaped destruction. Schematics for the glider bomb, chemical formulas for Compound 17, casualty projection tables, photographs of test sites that showed dead animals scattered across the desert, and a handwritten letter from Roosevelt to the Secretary of War. The letter is only 3 sentences long. It reads, "I have seen what you propose to build. I have considered the implications for this nation and for humanity. This program will not continue under my authority. The historian who found the documents immediately recognized what he was looking at. He contacted a military chemical weapons expert to verify the formulas. The expert later stated in an interview that Compound 17 was essentially a proto-nerve agent that predated similar weapons by more than 30 years. He said that if it had been used in 1908, it would have made mustard gas look humane by comparison. Mustard gas caused horrific injuries, but most victims survived. Compound 17 left no survivors in the primary exposure zone. The legacy of Project Blackdamp did not end with its cancellation. Fragments of Harlow's research were quietly preserved by military intelligence. During World War I, when Germany deployed chlorine gas at Ypres, American chemical warfare units reportedly consulted documents that bore striking similarities to Harlow's work. In World War II, the development of nerve agents, like Taboon and Sarin, followed design principles that matched the binding mechanisms Harlow had described 4 decades earlier. Whether German scientists independently discovered these principles, or whether intelligence from Project Blackdamp reached them through espionage channels remains classified. But the connections are difficult to ignore. In 1952, the United States Chemical Corps conducted a classified study to determine whether Compound 17 could be reverse engineered from surviving documentation. The study concluded that it could. It also concluded that modern dispersal systems could increase the effective kill radius by a factor of 10. That study has never been fully released to the public. In 2009, a team of chemists and historians attempted to recreate a small sample of Compound 17 using the declassified formulas. The experiment was conducted under strict safety protocols at a military research facility. They succeeded in synthesizing a compound that perfectly matched the described properties. When tested on tissue samples, it produced the exact degradation patterns that the Site 7 doctor had documented over a century earlier. The lead chemist described the results as terrifying. He said the compound was engineered with a level of sophistication that should not have been possible in 1904. He suggested that Harlow may have been decades ahead of his time, or that he had access to research that was never meant to be shared. The sample was destroyed immediately after testing. The researchers were debriefed and instructed not to publish their findings in any peer-reviewed journal. To this day, no academic paper on the recreation exists. What remains of Project Blackdamp is scattered and incomplete. The glider bomb schematics still exist in the National Archives, though access requires special clearance. The production facility in Arizona was demolished in 1909, and the land was sold to private owners who had no idea what had been built there. Site 7 is now a stretch of empty desert marked only by concrete foundations that have been worn smooth by wind and sand. No plaques, no historical markers, nothing to indicate that this patch of ground once held a weapon capable of erasing a city. Harlow's personal papers were donated to a university library after his death, but the sections related to his military work were removed before the collection was made public. What happened to those pages is unknown. Some historians believe they were destroyed. Others believe they remain in a classified vault somewhere in Washington, waiting for a crisis severe enough to justify their use. So here's the question that no one has been able to answer definitively. Did Roosevelt shut down Project Blackdamp because he believed it was immoral? Or did he shut it down because he understood that once a weapon like that existed, it would eventually be used? And if it was used by America first, it would guarantee that every other nation would race to build their own version. Perhaps he saw a future where cities burned not from bombs, but from invisible clouds that killed indiscriminately. Perhaps he decided that some technologies should never be allowed to mature. Or perhaps he simply recognized that the weapon Harlow built was too effective, that it would end wars, yes, but it would end them by making the cost of conflict so apocalyptic that the very concept of civilization would collapse under the weight of it. Whatever his reasoning, Roosevelt made a choice that erased one of the most dangerous weapons ever conceived on American soil. And for nearly a century, that choice kept Compound 17 out of the hands of those who would have used it without hesitation. If you found this story as disturbing as I did, hit the like button and subscribe because we have more classified projects and buried secrets coming your way. And let me know in the comments, do you think Roosevelt made the right call, or should Project Blackdamp have been preserved as the ultimate deterrent? I will see you in the next one.